Principles of communication are basically our rules, our guidelines, the things we know to be true about communication. There are a number of them, starting with our first principle, which says that communication can be intentional or unintentional. If you look at this image here, you can see a number of different ways that this one person is either standing, wearing different clothing, having different facial expressions, eye contact, and such. Each of these things, all of those components, can lead to interpretations of your behavior, whether you intend that interpretation to be done in a certain way or not. We can intentionally give out information. For example, the man in the center here wearing a suit is intentionally trying to relay information about his career path or his intentions for a career path. So those can be intentional. However, there are other forms of communication that are unintentional. For example, maybe he is not aware that his arms being held up high and outward shows some form of confidence. Whereas some others, for example, this person looking down with his mouth straight across and firm, could be submitting the information that he is lying. And that is not necessarily universal to everyone, but what the main point is that our communication is oftentimes more unintentional than intentional. We choose to send information, and at the same time, we inadvertently send information that could be interpreted in a number of ways based on the kind of person that receives the information. So, principle number one, we know to be true that communication can be both intentional and unintentional. Communication is also irreversible, which is principle number two. What we say can never be taken back. Now, we can clarify, we can restate, we can do all of those things, but we can never make it fully disappear. So once you say something, maybe you say something that hurts the feelings of another person, and it is taken either in anger or maybe it's just misinterpreted. While you can clarify or apologize, that doesn't mean that that instance of communication is now gone. You can't take it back and start over fresh. That communication will remain in their minds. And in some cases, it is a minor impact to almost no impact at all. And in other cases, it can create a perception of a person based on how many times you communicate in these ways. I've got a list of quotes here that I think highlight how misspeaking, and in this case it's verbally having a misspoken verbal interaction, can actually impact your reputation. Here's the first one from George W. Bush. I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family. That kind of statement, although obviously unintentional, definitely impacts his perception or the perception we have of him. Another one from Dan Quayle. I love California. I practically grew up in Phoenix. Again, not necessarily intentional, but does send a message that is quite extreme and can impact that perception of this person. Here's another one from Brooke Shields during an interview to become a spokesperson for a federal anti-smoking campaign. And she said, smoking kills. If you're killed, you've lost a very important part of your life. Well, yep. That is probably true. So there is, again, another form of communication that you can't take back. And in this case, she was attempting to become a spokesperson for this program. And then finally, our last one here from Ivana Trump. Fiction writing is great. You can make up almost anything. And I will leave that there as it is. So communication is intentional and unintentional. It is also irreversible. And it is something that can not be done, if that makes any sense. We cannot not communicate. If you've ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you'll be able to see this here, and I think it highlights it clearly.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the
So here we have an image of the children, or in this case, mostly adults, that are sitting in the classroom audience and are blankly staring at the professor as he speaks. So, what is being communicated there? Yes, he is speaking information. He is trying to reveal stuff to his students and relay information through his lecture, but the students themselves are also communicating. It is impossible not to communicate. In this case, their facial expressions show that they are uninterested in what is being said, and in an extreme case, extremely bored with what is being said. So, what's being communicated here? Well, in this case, there's a lot of emotion being communicated or lack thereof. In other situations, it might be that the communication is being relayed through your clothing style, as we mentioned earlier, or again, your facial expressions or tone of voice. And in some cases, we can even communicate material when we're asleep or when we're silent. Silence alone communicates a message. So if you send a text message to a friend and it takes hours for you to get a response, if that message was originally a heated issue, you might take that silence as a message they're sending to you, that they're upset with you or that they're frustrated or they just don't want to talk to you. So even silence is a form of communication. We cannot not communicate. Principle number 4 is that communication is unrepeatable. We cannot do the exact same thing 2 times or more than 2 times. We cannot repeat ourselves. Yes, we can restate a sentence. Yes, we can request something or do the same nonverbal expressions more than once. But purely the act of doing it more than once sends another form of the message. So there's different encoding and decoding going on there. For example, if I ask my child to please go clean your room, and they stare at me blankly, I could repeat myself by saying, please go clean your room. Now, even if my tone and my word choice were identical, the fact that I had to repeat myself is another form of communication or another part of the communication process. So it is unrepeatable in all circumstances, even when you identically say the same thing 2 seconds after you said it. I always think of the example of driving down the highway and you hear a commercial for Taco Bell, and that Taco Bell commercial comes on a minute after it had just come on. Well, when you first heard it, maybe you missed it and you didn't really gather what you were hearing. But the second time it comes on, it sticks out because you just heard it and you're more engaged in that idea. And I think, oh, I could use Taco Bell right now, when you may not have heard it the first time or you have had passed over it the first time. So it's not necessarily a complete repeat of the information because communication is absolutely not repeatable. Next one, and our final one, is principle number 5, which says that communication has both content and relational meaning. So, for example, if you were to hear this message from your friend, hey, let's get together later, that would be acceptable. That would be completely normal. And you would think, all right, yeah, let's get together later. Or maybe I can't, I have to study, whatever it might be. So saying let's get together later from a friend to a friend is completely acceptable. But what if your boss or your instructor came up to you and said, hey, let's get together later? That tone, that language choice for that particular relationship becomes quite uncomfortable. So in this sense, we have both a content message, which means the request just to be with another person, and a relational meaning. There's a change in the meaning of the message because of the relationship you have with the person speaking it. Same would go for something like this. If, let's say, you are speaking to your friend and you say, or your sister or brother or child, hey, you look really pretty today. That is different from a boss to a female employee or vice versa saying, hey, you look really nice today or you look really pretty. Depending upon their tone, that relationship could very much change the nature of that message. All messages have both the basic the surface level information that is literal, that you can see just from the voice, just from the words, and also a level of information that exists based on the relationship you have with the person. Going back to the example from previous principles where I told my son or my daughter or my children to go clean their room, that message means something different if I say it to my children as compared to if I were to say that to my husband. Both of those are quite different. Even though the words are the same, they are very different based on the relationship. So there you have it, 5 principles of communication, and each one of them are rules, guidelines, or things we know to be true about communication.